Everyone, I'm so excited to see you today. In fact, you're seeing me today, but I know on the other side of this camera, you're here with me. And I want to say thank you for joining me. And this is the last episode of this series, The Mistakes That Mentors Make. And I've been talking about what mentors do. And today's session is a very important one. It's a very pertinent one. And I want to speak about a mentor's growth and their development. A lot of times when you're a mentor and you're a parent, or you're someone that gives and you give and you give and you give and you give, sometimes you may not realize that you need to receive, because you might be someone that motivates, you might be someone that encourages, you might be someone that helps others. But I have come across this saying, and it's like a real saying, is that encouragers need encouragement. If you motivate others, you need motivation. If you feed others, you need to be fed. And mentors, a lot of times, they may neglect themselves because they've got such a generous heart. They've got such a passion to inspire others that they neglect their own need to grow themselves. So one of the mistakes that mentors make is that they neglect their own growth and their own development. And great mentors never stop learning, never stop reflecting, and never stop improving. So this day, I want to talk about this subject and talk about the mistakes that mentors make. The first one that I would say that they make, I just spoke about it, but we're going to go deeper into it, is stopping your own development. And what that can look like is believing experience is enough. I know this to be true because in my walk, in my life, in my career, this is something that I've experienced. You know, I've been mentoring now for nearly a quarter of a century. Oh my gosh, nearly a quarter of a century I've been mentoring for. So I've been doing it for a long time. And there's been times in my seasons and in my career that I have just been relying on what I've always known, or what I've learned, or what I've seen, or what I've experienced. But the reality of it is that experience is not enough. You know, we have to go through more learning, and we have to go through more things that we develop as we go ahead. So what it can look like as well, stopping your own growth, is not accepting feedback, avoiding feedback. And when we avoid feedback, that is what prevents us from even getting new insights. Using outdated methods. You know, there's so much technology now. There's so many ways of doing things that never existed before. So sometimes it's not just about being precious about how we done it before. It's about, okay, let's look at how it could be done now differently and even in a better way. The other thing that can be around stopping your development is not seeking development, not seeking training, not seeking being, growing and becoming. You've got to do these things to grow. But if you're not seeking it, if you're not being intentional, you might not be experiencing the growth that's required, even though you grow from experience. But if you grow from learning, and you grow from training, and you grow from courses, that gives you a multi-dimensional way of growing. And assuming there is nothing left to learn, now that is a dangerous place for any of us to be in. Because even if you lived a million lifetimes, there will still be something for you to learn. There really would. So it's really important for us to all realize that we need to grow and we need to learn. And the impact of us stopping growing and us stopping our own development is we have reduced effectiveness. We're not as good as we could be. There is stagnation. That's one of the effects. And we lose adaptability because we're not adapting, we're not changing our methodology. You know, we can't just be stuck on tradition and doing things the way that we've always done them. We can move and go forward and do things in a new way. Also, we have missed opportunities because we just weren't ready for the opportunities because we wasn't growing. And if we keep on with outdated approaches, we're going to not be ready for the new stage. It's like when people talk about AI, like AI is going to take your job, and it's not AI is going to take your job. It's someone that knows how to use AI is going to take your job. So it's us realizing that we need to be up to date, and we need to be moving forward, and we need to becoming advanced. And great mentors, the alternative that they use is they commit to lifelong learning. Lifelong learning, not just in your role, not just in mentoring, not just at work, but in life, in relationships, in parenting, in marriage, in all these different areas, in faith, we keep growing. So this is really important. The next mistake that a lot of mentors make is failing to reflect. As a mentor, you've got to reflect. You've got to be able to take the time to reflect. You've got to be able to have the space to reflect, because that's going to give you insights into what you need to do next, or how you can apply something in a different way, or how to find a solution for a scenario that you're in. So what that can look like is not reviewing sessions. Sometimes, and I've seen it before, when I've been mentoring back to back, back to back, back to back, back to back, sometimes I've just not gone back and just reflected on the sessions I've had, because when you've left one session and you go straight into another session, sometimes you can not reflect on the session that you just had. Being able to reflect on your sessions, being able to think, what did I do in that session that was good? What did I do that could have been better? What would I do differently the next session I have? That would improve you in so many ways. The next thing is repeating mistakes. When we're not reviewing our sessions, when we're not reflecting, we're just repeating mistakes. And when we're repeating mistakes in life, we're just going around the same mountain, we're going around the same situations, we're bucking our toe on the same rock. And that is not helping us to move forward. The other thing is, what it looks like is when we're ignoring lessons, when we're ignoring what we learned before, that's the fruit of failing to reflect and assuming that everything works, because everything doesn't work, and everything that we do doesn't work. A lot of times we have to recognize that we learn more from our mistakes, we learn more from failing, but then we need humility, because we have to be able to acknowledge that we're making mistakes. We have to, we have to have self-esteem to the point that we don't feel we're not a good person if we're actually making mistakes, because the way that we learn and the way that we grow and the way that we become is the process of elimination. So we eliminate the things that never worked, and that's really important. So the impact of failing to reflect is that we just decrease in the speed of our improvement. We just improve at a slower rate. There's reduced awareness. We have many missed learning opportunities. And we've said this already, but I'll say it in a different way. We have limited growth, because our growth is limited when we don't reflect. And great mentors, they reflect after every mentoring session. They reflect after supporting someone. They reflect on, okay, what was good, or how can it be better? They do that. So that's really important for you to consider as well. The next mistake that mentors make is just measuring effort instead of impact. A lot of times you can be busy, but it doesn't mean that you're being fruitful, or you can be busy and it doesn't mean that you're being productive. So we can't just say that because we're making effort, we're doing it well. As people say, the saying goes, practice makes perfect. And what I heard when someone else repeated this, and they say, it's practice doesn't make perfect, it's practice makes permanent. So the more that we're actually doing things, if we're doing it in the wrong way, we could be like permanently embedding a wrong methodology. We could be permanently embedding a wrong way of doing it. So what this looks like, if you're just looking at effort, it can be just counting mentoring sessions. So yeah, you've had 10 mentoring sessions, but are they 10 mentoring sessions that are exponentially growing, or are they 10 of the same sessions repeated one after another? Are we focusing on activity instead of focusing on outcomes? Are we being able to just look at success in measures, or is there no success that is being measured? So these are things that we need to think about when we're just focusing on measuring effort instead of impact, and assuming effort equals value. Effort does not equal value. You could be making a lot of effort, but you're not necessarily accumulating value or increasing value. So these are the impacts, the negative impacts of measuring effort. So if we're just measuring effort and we're not looking at impacts, we can actually achieve false success. We could be climbing up the ladder, but we put our ladder on the wrong wall. Do you know what I mean? So you can be going far up the ladder, but when you get to the top, you're like, this is not the wall that the ladder should have been on. So effort doesn't mean that it's going to be the success that you actually want. And there can be like poor accountability, because if it's just effort and not impacts that you're focusing on, is it actually working? Are you actually making a difference? Are the children that you're working with, are they changing? Are they being inspired? Are they being encouraged? Do they feel like they're progressing in life? These are the things. If you're not watching these things, you don't know if you're really making impact, even though you're having the sessions. And we can miss the outcomes. So when you've got mentoring sessions, there are outcomes that should be agreed before the session. When you're referred a mentee, there should be reasons why you're working with this mentee. As an organization, leaders will tell us this is why we want to work with this young person. This is why we're referring the young person, and so forth. So there are outcomes to be achieved. So if we're just focusing on the efforts and we're not looking at the impacts, we can actually miss the outcomes that we should be mentoring for. We could be mentoring and achieving some outcomes, but they're not the outcomes that were intended before the session, which is good in a sense of having additional outcomes, but you should at least achieve the outcomes that were the primary outcomes that should be achieved. So being able to look at impacts, that's going to definitely help you as well. And the next thing is making sure that you understand that you have limited improvement if you don't look at impact. And one of the things that I've seen, there's some mentors that are really impactful, some mentors that have a lot of impact, make a lot of difference because each of their sessions is impactful. They don't measure their sessions by talking. They don't measure their sessions by someone actually turned up at the mentoring session. They don't even mentor their mentoring session based on just how friendly the child was with them. Because sometimes you have to be not friendly with a child because they've not achieved something or they've not done something that they said they was going to do and so forth. So it's not about being friendly. It's about knowing that you've got to be able to make that impact. So the best mentors, when they make impact, is by them understanding the outcomes that they're achieving. And that's by being focused on the impact. And what great mentors do is they measure confidence, they measure growth, they measure independence, they measure the outcomes that they've been given to achieve. So this is important that we understand this. So the last one that I'm going to talk about now, and this I feel is an important one for a lot of mentors. It's important for parents. It's important for even friends. Because as I said at the start of this series, it's not just for someone that is called a mentor. You could be a youth worker, you could be a social worker, you could be a parent, you could be a youth coach, you could be a life coach, you could be all of these things. And these things are relatable. But I feel that this thing that I'm going to talk about is relatable for everyone. It's when us as mentors, we forget the goal is independence. We forget the goal is that this person is supposed to leave at some point, that this person is supposed to not need us at some point. And this can be really impactful for us as mentors, because sometimes we just want to keep mentoring children or want to keep on encouraging them or want to be with them because we enjoy their company. But really the point of mentoring is that you give them the skills, you give them the tools, you give them the mindsets, or you help to cultivate the mindsets that they can do these things when you're not around anymore, and that they can continue to have experience, they can continue to have good experiences when they don't see you as their mentor anymore. And that's why I said even as parents this is relatable, because you want your children to be able to flourish even when they're not a teenager and they're not under your tutelage as a parent. So what that looks like when we forget the goal is independence is wanting to remain needed. This is something that we need to really work on as individuals, because sometimes because of the lack of love that we've had in our lives, or the trauma responses, or the things that we've had happen to us, we want to be needed, and that can be unhealthy, There's a healthy version of it and there's an unhealthy version of it. Being needed as someone is healthy if it's healthy. But if it's because there's low self-esteem, there's low self-security, and there's insecurity, and we want to be needed because of that, then that's unhealthy. So that is a real issue we need to work on. What it can look like as well is when we're creating reliance. And if we're creating reliance, then it's like we're not empowering someone to move on. It can be that we're holding on too tightly. And we have to be able to let go of these relationships, because we need people to be able to fly and to flourish and to go forward themselves. We could be discouraging autonomy. We could be discouraging that they're independent and making decisions and so forth. And we can be confusing dependency with success. Us being needed to a point that they're absolutely dependent on us is not success. It's actually a lack of success. So we have to really be clear about this. So forgetting the goal is independence, some of the impacts are reduced confidence in the young person that we're working with. There's a limited independence, so they can't really do well without you. It's delayed growth because they feel it's like riding with trainer wheels on. You know what I mean? Like if you always got these trainer wheels on, you don't know if you actually can ride. We got to get those trainer wheels off. So it's the same thing. So if they don't feel that they can do these things by themselves, they can put these things into practice that they've learned from you, then they're not learning, or they're not growing or developing at the speed that they could. It can also create poor self-belief, and there could be long-term dependency. So your intervention and your support of mentoring was not as effective as it could have been because now they need you more. The alternative for great mentors is they develop people who can thrive without them. You've got to develop mentees, children, friends, people that can thrive even if you're not in their life, even if you're not around. They can put into practice, they can put the things that you told them into practice, and that they can remember the great things that you shared with them. So the reflective mentor, are you the reflective mentor? Are you the mentor that's reflecting on your growth? This is something that we all have to think about. And these are the questions, am I listening effectively? Am I creating trust? Am I helping or am I rescuing? Am I challenging the person I'm working with enough? And what am I learning? So when we look at all these things, great mentors continue learning, they reflect regularly, they measure impact, and focus on developing independent people. So as we come to the end of the series of the mistakes that mentors make, I hope that you've taken a lot away from this. And I hope if you've not watched all of the videos, go back and look at the different mistakes, look at the communication mistakes, look at the relationship mistakes. And today was a development mistakes. So I hope that you've got from this series, and we know that sharing is caring. And put something in the comments if you've learned anything from this series and if you've learned anything from this episode. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And I'll join you next week.